Sarah Mitchell had always believed that kindness was its own reward, but as she climbed the creaky stairs to apartment 4B every Tuesday and Thursday, she wondered if she was just naive. The elderly man who lived there, Vincent, had become her favorite client since she started volunteering with the community outreach program 6 months ago. "Mr. Vincent, it's Sarah," she called, knocking gently on the weathered door. The hallway smelled of old wood and forgotten dreams, typical of this run-down Brooklyn neighborhood where retired folks scraped by on Social Security. The door opened slowly, revealing a man in his late 60s with silver hair and tired blue eyes that seemed to hold decades of secrets. Vincent Rossi, as he'd introduced himself, was always impeccably dressed despite his modest circumstances. Today, in a crisp white shirt and dark slacks that seemed too expensive for someone living in this building. "Sarah, my dear, you're a ray of sunshine on this gloomy September afternoon," Vincent said, his voice carrying a faint accent she could never quite place. Come in, I just made coffee." The apartment was sparse but spotless, furnished with a few pieces that looked antique and valuable. Sarah had learned not to ask too many questions about Vincent's past. He told her he was a widower, that his wife had passed 3 years ago, and that his only son was busy with business and rarely visited. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Vincent?" Sarah asked, settling into the familiar routine of checking his blood pressure and organizing his medications. "Any pain in your joints?" "Only the pain of loneliness, my dear," he replied with a sad smile. "But you make that bearable." As Sarah worked, she noticed Vincent watching her with an intensity that sometimes made her uncomfortable. Not in a creepy way, but as if he was studying her, memorizing every detail. She'd catch him on the phone sometimes, speaking in rapid Italian, his voice dropping to a whisper when he noticed her listening. "Mr. Vincent, you never told me what kind of business your son is in," Sarah said casually, as she counted out his heart medication. Vincent's hands stilled on his coffee cup. For a moment his tired eyes flashed with something sharp and dangerous, before returning to their usual gentle warmth. "Import and export," he said simply. "Very successful but very demanding. Takes him all over the world." Sarah nodded, but something in his tone made her glance up. Vincent was staring out the window, his jaw tense. In that moment, he looked nothing like the frail old man who needed help opening pickle jars. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Of course, dear, just thinking about family." He turned back to her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Family is everything, you know. Everything we do for family." As Sarah gathered her supplies to leave, she heard Vincent's phone buzz. He glanced at the screen and his entire demeanor changed. His back straightened, his shoulders squared, and for a split second, she saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. "I have to take this," he said, his voice suddenly commanding. "Thank you for today, Sarah. Same time Thursday?" "Of course," she replied, but Vincent had already turned away, answering the phone in a low, urgent tone. As she walked down the hallway, Sarah could hear Vincent's voice through the thin walls. He was speaking Italian again, but this time his tone was different, authoritative, dangerous. The last thing she heard before the elevator doors closed was Vincent saying something that chilled her to the bone, even though she didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone perfectly. It was the voice of a man who was used to being obeyed without question. Capítulo 2. Thursday arrived with the first hint of autumn in the air, and Sarah found herself looking forward to her visit with Vincent more than usual. Despite the strange moment at the end of their last meeting, she genuinely enjoyed the old man's company. He was intelligent, well-read, and had fascinating stories about the old days that he shared sparingly. This time, she brought homemade lasagna from her grandmother's recipe. Vincent had mentioned loving Italian food, and Sarah thought it might remind him of happier times with his late wife. "Mr. Vincent, I brought you something special," she called through the door. When he answered, Vincent's eyes lit up with genuine pleasure. "Sarah, you beautiful girl, what did you do?" "Homemade lasagna. I thought you might enjoy it." Vincent's reaction was immediate and unexpected. His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment he looked utterly vulnerable. "Madonna mia," he whispered, then caught himself. "I mean, this is very kind. My Maria used to make lasagna just like this." As they shared the meal, Vincent became more talkative than usual. He told her about growing up in Little Italy, about his parents' restaurant, about meeting his wife at a church social when they were both 19. "She was the most beautiful woman in Brooklyn," he said, his voice soft with memory. "But more than that, she was good, pure. She made me want to be a better man. You talk about her like she saved you from something, Sarah observed gently. Vincent's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Perhaps she did. After lunch, Sarah was helping Vincent organize his medications when she noticed something that made her stomach drop. As he reached for a glass of water, his shirt sleeve rode up, revealing a long, jagged scar running from his wrist almost to his elbow. But it wasn't just any scar. It had the distinctive pattern of a bullet wound she'd seen during her nursing training. Vincent caught her staring and quickly pulled his sleeve down. "Old accident," he said dismissively. "That's a bullet wound," Sarah said quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vincent's gentle demeanor vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You have very observant eyes, Sarah. That can be dangerous." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning Sarah didn't want to understand. Vincent must have seen the fear flicker across her face, because his expression immediately softened. "I'm sorry, dear, I didn't mean to frighten you. It was a hunting accident many years ago." But Sarah had seen enough bullet wounds to know the difference. This wasn't from any hunting rifle. This was from a handgun, fired at close range. And the way Vincent had reacted, the momentary flash of something predatory in his eyes, told her everything she needed to know. Vincent Rossi was not the harmless old man he pretended to be. "I should go," Sarah said, starting to pack her supplies with trembling hands. "Sarah, wait." Vincent's voice was gentle again, pleading. "Please don't be afraid of me. I would never hurt you. You have to believe that." She paused at the door. Despite her fear, something in his voice made her turn back. Vincent looked genuinely distressed, his hands shaking slightly as he reached toward her. "You're the first person in 3 years who's looked at me like I'm worth something," he said quietly. "Like I'm just a man, not what I used to be. Please don't let an old scar change that." Sarah found herself torn between compassion and common sense. The logical part of her brain screamed to run, to report him to her supervisor, to never come back. But the part of her that had become genuinely fond of this lonely old man hesitated. "What did you used to be?" "Mr. Vincent," she asked softly. Vincent met her eyes steadily. "Someone I'm trying very hard not to be anymore." As Sarah waited for the elevator, she heard Vincent's phone ring. She couldn't help but listen, as his voice carried through the thin walls, speaking rapid Italian in that same commanding tone she'd heard before. The last word she heard clearly was Marcus, spoken with a mixture of love and exasperation that only a parent could manage. The elevator doors closed, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just glimpsed something much larger and more dangerous than one lonely old man with secrets. And despite every instinct telling her to run, she knew she'd be back on Tuesday. Capítulo 3. Tuesday morning brought unexpected rain, the kind of sudden downpour that soaked through clothes and chilled to the bone. Sarah stood outside Vincent's building, debating whether to cancel their session. She'd spent the weekend researching bullet wounds and trying to convince herself she was overreacting. But Vincent had looked so genuinely happy when she'd brought him the lasagna. Whatever he'd done in his past, he was just a lonely old man now, wasn't he? The building's lobby was more crowded than usual. Sarah noticed 3 men in expensive suits standing near the mailboxes, all of them built like bodybuilders and wearing the kind of sunglasses that cost more than her monthly rent. They watched her approach the elevator with interest that made her skin crawl. "Excuse me, miss," one of them said in a thick Brooklyn accent. "You here to see Vincent?" Sarah's hand froze on the elevator button. I'm from the community health program." The men exchanged glances. "Mr. Blackwood's expecting you," the largest one said. "4th floor." "Blackwood?" Sarah's confusion must have shown on her face because the man added, "Vincent Blackwood. That's who you're here to see, right?" Yes," Sarah stammered, though her mind was racing. Vincent had always told her his last name was Rossi. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like an eternity. Sarah's hands were shaking as she knocked on Vincent's door, and when it opened, she found herself face to face with the most dangerous-looking man she'd ever seen. He was tall, probably 6'3", with dark hair styled perfectly despite the early hour. His suit probably cost more than Sarah's car, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds, beautiful and absolutely terrifying. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his jawline, and when he smiled, it didn't reach those cold, calculating eyes. "You must be Sarah," he said, his voice like velvet over steel. "I'm Marcus, Vincent's son." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. This was not the busy businessman she'd imagined. This was a predator in an expensive suit, and everything about him screamed danger. Where's Mr. Vincent?" she managed to ask. Marcus stepped aside, and Sarah saw Vincent sitting in his usual chair, but everything about him was different. His posture was straighter, his eyes sharper, and he was wearing a suit she'd never seen before. He looked like what he probably was, a man who was used to command and respect. "Sarah, dear, come in," Vincent said, but his voice carried new authority. "I'd like you to meet my son, Marcus." Marcus closed the door behind her, and Sarah became acutely aware that she was trapped in a room with two men who were clearly not what they'd pretended to be. The apartment seemed different too. Furniture that looked expensive in daylight now looked like it belonged in a mansion. "Dad's told me a lot about you," Marcus said, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Says you've been very kind to him. Kind enough that we thought you should know the truth," Vincent added gently, "about who we really are." Sarah's nursing bag slipped from her numb fingers. "What truth?" Marcus moved to the window, his movements fluid and controlled like a big cat. "My father didn't retire from importing and exporting, Sarah. He retired from running the largest crime family on the East Coast." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Everything suddenly made sense. The expensive clothes, the bullet scar, the way Vincent spoke on the phone, the bodyguards downstairs. She couldn't finish the sentence. "Mafia," Marcus said simply. "And before you ask, yes, we're very good at it." Vincent leaned forward in his chair. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. You've become very important to me over these past months, like the daughter I never had. But now that you know the truth, you have a choice to make." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears. Her mind raced between terror and disbelief. This couldn't be real. The gentle man who reminded her of her grandfather couldn't be a crime boss. But the evidence was overwhelming. "What kind of choice?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus turned from the window, and for the first time his smile looked genuinely amused, though she caught a flicker of something else. Interest? Concern. "You can walk away right now, forget you ever met us, and live your nice, normal life. Dad will make sure you're transferred to a different program. No questions asked." Sarah stared at him, trying to process the surreal situation. Part of her wanted to run screaming from the apartment, but another part, a part she didn't recognize, was fascinated by the glimpse into this hidden world. "Or?" Sarah asked, surprised by her own curiosity. "Or you stay," Vincent said softly, his eyes filled with hope and vulnerability that reminded her of the man she'd come to care about. "You accept that I'm not the helpless old man you thought I was, and you keep being my friend. But if you stay, you become part of this family. And once you're family, there's no going back," Marcus finished. "Ever." Sarah looked between father and son, seeing the resemblance she'd missed before, the same sharp intelligence, the same commanding presence, the same capacity for violence lurking beneath the surface. But she also saw something else in Vincent's eyes, the same loneliness that had drawn her to him in the first place. Beneath the dangerous crime boss was still an old man who missed his wife and craved genuine human connection. I can't process this right now," Sarah said, backing toward the door. "I need time to think. This is insane. You're telling me that the sweet old man I've been helping is actually—" "Was," Vincent corrected gently. "I was those things. But with you, Sarah, I've remembered what it feels like to be just a man. Just Vincent." Marcus studied her with those penetrating grey eyes. "Smart girl. You should think about it carefully. This isn't a decision you can take back." As Sarah stumbled toward the door, her mind spinning with implications, Vincent called her name. "Sarah, whatever you choose, know that these months with you have been the happiest I've had since Maria died." You gave an old man hope again. The elevator doors closed on the most terrifying and confusing moment of Sarah's life. As she descended, she could hear voices from the 4th floor, Marcus speaking in rapid Italian, his tone sharp and commanding. The last thing she heard was Vincent's voice, tired but firm. "She's a good girl, Marcus. Don't let anyone hurt her while she decides." Walking out into the rain, Sarah realized that her simple life had just become infinitely more complicated. And despite everything logical screaming at her to run, part of her was already planning to come back on Friday. But first, she needed to figure out who Sarah Mitchell really was when faced with the impossible. Capítulo 4. Sarah spent 3 sleepless nights staring at her bedroom ceiling, replaying every moment of her time with Vincent, or Vincent Blackwood, as she now knew him. Every kindness he'd shown her, every story he'd shared, took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of organized crime. She'd done research, looked up what she could find about the Blackwood name, though most of what she found was speculation and old newspaper clippings from decades ago. It painted a picture of a powerful family that had somehow managed to stay mostly out of the headlines, which, she was beginning to understand, was probably intentional. Friday morning arrived grey and cold, matching Sarah's mood perfectly. She'd called in sick to work, unable to concentrate on anything but the impossible decision weighing on her mind. By 10 a.m., she found herself standing outside Vincent's building, still undecided, but knowing she couldn't stay away. She had to see him again, had to look into his eyes and try to reconcile the dangerous man they'd revealed with the gentle soul she'd come to care about. The bodyguards were still there, but this time they nodded respectfully as she passed. One even held the elevator door for her, which somehow made everything more surreal. Vincent answered his door immediately, as if he'd been waiting by it all morning. He was back in his simple clothes, looking like the vulnerable old man she'd first met, but Sarah could no longer unsee the predator beneath. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said softly, relief evident in his voice. "I wasn't sure either," Sarah admitted, stepping inside hesitantly. Marcus was nowhere in sight, for which Sarah was grateful. His presence had been overwhelming, like standing too close to a barely contained wildfire. Vincent gestured to his usual chair and she sat carefully, maintaining distance between them. "You have questions," Vincent observed. "A million of them." Sarah took a shaky breath, steeling herself. "Were you lying about everything? Your wife, your loneliness, the stories about your childhood? Was any of it real?" Pain flashed across Vincent's weathered features, genuine pain that couldn't be faked. "Maria was real. Our love was real. Everything I told you about missing her, about being lonely, that was all true. The only lie was my name, and what I used to do for a living." "Used to do?" Sarah pressed. "I retired 3 years ago when Maria got sick. Handed everything over to Marcus. I thought I could just fade away. Become nobody." Vincent's voice carried deep weariness. "But you can't really retire from this life, Sarah. You can only step back from the daily operations." Sarah studied his face, looking for deception, but finding only weary honesty. The man sitting across from her still seemed like the Vincent she'd come to know, just with layers of complexity she was only beginning to understand. "Why did you tell me? You could have kept lying," she said. Vincent smiled sadly. "Because Marcus found out about you. He has people watching me, making sure I'm safe. When he learned that an outsider was getting close to me, he wanted to handle the situation." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "Handle it how?" "Not what you're thinking," Vincent said quickly, seeing her fear. "Marcus isn't needlessly violent, but he wanted to have you investigated, maybe scared off. I convinced him to let me tell you the truth instead. And if I choose to walk away, then you walk away. No one will bother you. You'll be transferred to help other clients, and we'll pretend this never happened." Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street where normal people lived normal lives. People who didn't have to decide whether to associate with crime families or lose someone they'd grown to love like family. "What if I stay? What does that actually mean?" she asked, though she was terrified of the answer. "It means you accept that I'm not just Vincent, the lonely widower. It means you understand that sometimes my phone will ring and I'll have to take calls about things you don't want to know about. It means Marcus and his people will become part of your world." The apartment door opened. And speak of the devil, Marcus walked in. Today he was dressed more casually, dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders. He was carrying coffee and pastries from what looked like an expensive bakery. "Sorry I'm late," he said, setting the bags on the table. "Meeting ran long." His presence immediately changed the energy in the room. Sarah found herself hyper-aware of everything about him. The way he moved with predatory grace, the way his eyes missed nothing, the way he managed to look both civilized and dangerous at the same time. But today, she also noticed something else. The way he glanced at her with what almost looked like concern, the careful way he moved, as if trying not to startle her. "Sarah was just asking what it means to stay," Vincent said. Marcus poured coffee into expensive cups Sarah had never seen before, his movements precise and controlled. "It means you become family, and family protects each other no matter what. I'm not asking to become part of your organization," Sarah said carefully, accepting the cup he offered. "You wouldn't be," Marcus replied, and she noticed their fingers brushed as he handed it over. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and from the way his eyes sharpened slightly, she suspected he'd felt it too. "You'd just be the woman who takes care of my father. But that automatically makes you untouchable. No rival family, no ambitious subordinate, no federal agent would dare harm you." "That sounds more like a threat than protection," Sarah said, though she found herself studying his face as he spoke. "In our world, they're the same thing," Marcus replied, settling into a chair nearby. "The threat is what provides the protection." Vincent watched the exchange between his son and Sarah with interest, though he remained silent. "Marcus, why don't you show Sarah around the building? Let her see what we're really offering," Vincent suggested. Sarah wanted to refuse, but curiosity won out. Marcus led her to the elevator, and instead of going down, they went up to the building's roof. What she found there took her breath away. The entire rooftop had been converted into a beautiful garden, complete with flowering plants, comfortable seating areas, and a stunning view of the Manhattan skyline. It was like a secret paradise hidden above the rundown neighborhood. "Dad created this after Mom died," Marcus said quietly, his voice gentler than she'd heard it before. "He needed somewhere peaceful to grieve, somewhere beautiful in the middle of all the ugliness." Sarah walked among the flowers, overwhelmed by the contrast between this serene space and the dangerous world she'd just learned about. "It's incredible. My father is a complicated man," Marcus said, moving to stand beside her, though he maintained a respectful distance. "He's done terrible things in his life, but he's also capable of great love, great loyalty, great beauty. That's what you've been seeing these past months, the man he is when he's not being the boss." Sarah turned to face him, studying his sharp features in the afternoon light. "And what about you? What are you when you're not being the boss?" Something flickered in Marcus's storm-grey eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps, or longing. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the city far below them. Sarah found herself wondering what it would be like to know a man like Marcus Blackwood, beyond the danger and violence, and immediately pushed the thought away. This was insane. She was contemplating joining a crime family, and now she was curious about the Don's son. "I need more time," she said finally, stepping back from him. Marcus nodded, accepting her need for distance. "Take all the time you need. But Sarah, whatever you decide, decide for yourself. Not because you're afraid, not because you feel obligated, because this is what you want." As they headed back downstairs, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd already made her decision. The question was whether she was brave enough to admit it. Capítulo 5. Sarah's decision crystallized at 2 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday night when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. Late-night calls usually meant emergencies she wasn't equipped to handle, but something made her pick up. "Sarah?" Vincent's voice was strained, older than she'd ever heard it. "I'm sorry to call so late, but I need help." She was out of bed and reaching for her clothes before he finished speaking. "What's wrong?" "It's nothing medical. I can't sleep. The dreams are back, and Could you come? I know it's asking too much, but I'll be there in 20 minutes. The building was different at night, darker, quieter, but somehow more alive with invisible tension. The bodyguards were still there, stationed like sentinels in the shadows. They nodded as she passed, and she realized they knew exactly who she was and why she was there. Vincent opened his door before she could knock. He was wearing a silk robe over pajamas, his silver hair disheveled, his face drawn with exhaustion and something deeper, grief so profound it seemed to emanate from his very bones. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. The apartment was dimly lit, classical music playing softly in the background. Sarah noticed a photograph on the side table she'd never seen before, a beautiful woman with dark hair and kind eyes, standing next to a much younger Vincent, who looked happy in a way she'd never seen him. "Maria," he said, following her gaze. "Our wedding day, 42 years ago." Sarah settled into the chair across from him. "Tell me about the dreams." Vincent's hands trembled slightly as he poured himself a glass of what looked like expensive whiskey. "She comes to me, Maria, and she asks me what I've become. She asks me if this is the man she married, if this is the life she died believing I'd live. What do you tell her? That I don't know anymore." His voice broke slightly. "For 40 years, I told myself everything I did was for her, for our family. But Marcus is grown now. Maria is gone, and I'm sitting in this apartment, pretending to be someone I'm not, because I don't know how to be anything else." Sarah reached across and covered his hand with hers. It was warm and surprisingly soft for someone with such a violent past. "You're being Vincent, the man who loves his son, who misses his wife, who looks forward to my visits because they make you feel human again." Vincent looked up at her with such raw vulnerability that Sarah's heart ached. "Is that enough? After everything I've done, is it enough to just try to be good in the time I have left?" Before Sarah could answer, the apartment door opened and Marcus walked in. He was dressed in all black, his hair slightly mussed, and there was something wild in his eyes that made Sarah's pulse quicken. He looked like he'd come straight from something dangerous. "Dad, I just heard—" He stopped when he saw Sarah. "What's she doing here?" "I called her," Vincent said simply. "I needed a friend." Marcus's jaw tightened, and Sarah saw him struggle with something. Frustration, concern, maybe even jealousy that his father had reached out to someone else. "It's after 2 a.m. You called a civilian in the middle of the night because you had a bad dream." The dismissive tone in his voice sparked something fierce in Sarah. Despite her own uncertainties about this world, she wouldn't let him diminish Vincent's pain. "Don't talk about your father like that. He's hurting and he asked for help. That's what people do when they trust each other." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah realized she'd just snapped at one of the most dangerous men in New York. But instead of anger, she saw something like respect flicker in his eyes. "You're right," he said quietly, and she heard genuine remorse in his voice. "I'm sorry, Dad. I just worry about you exposing yourself like this." "Exposing myself?" Vincent laughed bitterly. "Marcus, I'm a 69-year-old man sitting in an apartment at 2 a.m., crying about dreams of my dead wife. How much more exposed can I get?" Marcus moved to the bar and poured himself a drink, his movements sharp with suppressed emotion. "You could get hurt. She could get hurt. Every connection you make outside the family is a vulnerability. Then maybe it's time to stop living like we're at war," Vincent said firmly. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Sarah found herself watching the interplay between father and son, seeing years of conflict and love and fear wrapped up in every word. "I should go," Sarah said, starting to stand. "No." Both men spoke simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, messing it up even more. For a moment he looked younger, less controlled. "Stay, please, Dad's right. He needs this. He needs you." Sarah settled back into her chair, acutely aware that something fundamental had just shifted. Marcus poured another glass of whiskey and handed it to her, their fingers brushing again in that electric way that made her stomach flip. "So," Marcus said, settling into the chair beside her instead of across the room, "Dad has nightmares, I have insomnia, and you apparently have a hero complex. We're quite a dysfunctional little family." Despite everything, Sarah laughed. "Is that what we are? A family?" Vincent smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "If you want to be." Marcus was studying her with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through to her soul. But tonight, there was something different in his gaze. Less calculation, more genuine interest. "The question is, what do you want, Sarah Mitchell? Really want, not what you think you should want." Sarah looked between the two men who had somehow become the most important people in her life. Vincent, with his gentle sadness and genuine affection. Marcus, with his dangerous charm and the way he made her feel alive in ways she'd never experienced. "I want to stop being afraid," she said honestly, surprised by her own certainty. "I want to stop pretending that my safe little life was actually making me happy. And I want—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I want to see what happens if I say yes." Vincent's smile was radiant. Marcus's was something altogether different, predatory and possessive and hungry, in a way that made Sarah's heart race, but also tinged with something that looked almost like wonder. "Then welcome to the family, Sarah," Marcus said, raising his glass. "I promise it won't be boring." As they toasted her decision with expensive whiskey at 3 a.m., Sarah realized she'd just committed to a life she couldn't possibly imagine. But looking at the two men who had somehow captured her heart in completely different ways, she knew she'd made the right choice, even if it might destroy her. Capítulo 6. 3 weeks into her new reality, Sarah thought she was adjusting well to being part of the Blackwood family. Vincent's health had improved dramatically, whether from having someone to talk to honestly, or simply from not having to pretend to be helpless anymore. She wasn't sure. Their twice-weekly visits had evolved into genuine friendship, and she'd grown comfortable with the occasional mysterious phone call or visit from men in expensive suits. What she wasn't prepared for was the way Marcus had begun inserting himself into their routine. It started small. He'd arrive just as she was leaving, or bring lunch for all three of them. But gradually, his presence became a regular part of her visits. Sarah told herself it was because he was protective of his father, but she couldn't ignore the way his eyes followed her every movement, or how he found excuses to brush against her hand when passing her coffee. Today, Marcus was already at the apartment when she arrived, sitting at Vincent's kitchen table with newspapers spread out and a laptop open. He was dressed casually again, dark slacks and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled up, revealing surprisingly elegant hands marked by a few small scars. "Sarah, perfect timing," Vincent said, looking up from his crossword puzzle. "Marcus was just telling me about his meeting this morning." "Everything went smoothly," Marcus said, closing the laptop. "The Baltimore situation is resolved." Sarah had learned not to ask what these situations were. She suspected they involved things she didn't want to know about, and both men seemed grateful for her willful ignorance. "How are you feeling today, Vincent?" she asked, pulling out her blood pressure cuff. "Like a new man. In fact, I was thinking of taking a walk in the garden later. Maybe you'd join me?" Sarah wrapped the cuff around his arm, hyper-aware of Marcus watching her every movement. "Oh, of course. Your blood pressure is excellent, by the way. Best it's been since I started seeing you. Having something to live for makes a difference," Vincent said quietly. Marcus's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with a frown. "I have to take this," he said, moving toward the balcony. "Give me 5 minutes." Once they were alone, Vincent leaned forward conspiratorially. "He likes you, you know." Sarah nearly dropped her stethoscope. "What?" "Marcus. He's completely taken with you. I haven't seen him this interested in a woman since, well, ever." "Vincent, I don't think—" "Sarah, my dear, I didn't survive 40 years in this business by missing the obvious. The way he looks at you, the way he finds excuses to be here when you visit, the way he gets tense whenever other men are around you. Classic Blackwood behavior when we've found something we want to protect." Sarah's cheeks burned. "He's just being protective because I'm your friend," Vincent laughed. "Oh, my sweet girl. You have no idea how attractive innocence is to a man like Marcus. He spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who want something from him. Money, power, protection, favors. You're the first person he's met who genuinely doesn't care about any of that." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus returned from the balcony, his expression darker than before. "Dad, we need to talk privately." The change in his demeanor was immediate and frightening. Gone was the charming man who'd been flirting with her over coffee. This was the Marcus who ran a crime empire, and his eyes were cold as winter steel. "Sarah should go," he said curtly. "No." Vincent's voice carried absolute authority. "She's family now. She stays." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he moved to the window and checked the street below before turning back to them. "Tommy Cardano was found dead yesterday morning. 3 bullets to the head, very professional." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She didn't know who Tommy Cardano was, but from Vincent's expression it wasn't good news. "Who?" Vincent asked quietly. "We're not sure yet. But Tommy was asking questions about you, Dad. About where you've been living, who you've been seeing." Vincent's face went pale. "How much did he know?" "Enough to be dangerous." Marcus's eyes flicked to Sarah. He knew about her. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah felt the walls of her safe little world crumbling around her. "What does that mean?" Marcus moved closer, his presence both comforting and terrifying. "It means someone is very interested in my father's new life, and by extension they're interested in you." "But I don't know anything," Sarah protested. "I never asked questions, I never—" "It doesn't matter what you know," Marcus said gently. "It matters what they think you know, or what they think you could be used for." Vincent stood slowly, and Sarah saw the crime boss emerge fully for the first time. His entire bearing changed. Shoulders back, chin up, eyes sharp and calculating. "What are our options? We could move you, set you up somewhere safe, maybe Florida or California. Sarah could come with you if she wants." "Running," Vincent said with distaste. "Doherty," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "We handle this the permanent way. Send a message that Vincent Blackwood may be retired, but he's still untouchable." Sarah watched in fascination and horror as father and son communicated in a shorthand developed over decades of shared violence. This was their world, a place where problems were solved with bullets and threats, where retirement was never really an option. "There's a third choice," Vincent said slowly. "We bring Sarah deeper into the family. Make it clear she's not just some random civilian who stumbled into our lives." Marcus's eyes sharpened. What are you suggesting? Vincent looked between his son and Sarah, a calculating expression on his weathered face. I'm suggesting that if people are going to assume she's important to us anyway, we might as well make it official. Sarah felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. What does that mean? Exactly. Vincent smiled, but it wasn't the gentle expression she was used to. This was the smile of a chess master making his final move. It means, my dear, that you're about to discover what it really means to be a Blackwood woman. Marcus was staring at his father with something between admiration and alarm. Dad, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. The question is whether Sarah is brave enough to say yes. Looking between the two men who had somehow become her world, Sarah realized that her choice 3 weeks ago had been nothing compared to what they were asking of her now. But as she met Marcus's intense gaze and saw something vulnerable lurking beneath the dangerous exterior, she found herself nodding. Tell me what I need to do. Vincent's smile became genuinely warm. First, you need to understand exactly what kind of family you're joining. Marcus, show her the newspaper. Marcus handed her the folded paper, and Sarah's world shifted again as she read the headline about a respected businessman found dead in his car. But it was the accompanying photo that made her gasp. Vincent Blackwood, 40 years younger, standing beside a man identified as notorious crime boss Antonio Cardano. The caption read, Vincent the Wolf Blackwood, believed to be the most feared enforcer in organized crime history. Sarah looked up at the gentle old man she'd been bringing soup to for months. The wolf? Vincent's eyes held depths of darkness she was only beginning to understand. Everyone has a past, my dear. The question is whether you can live with mine. Capítulo 7. The next morning, Sarah woke up in a world that felt completely different. Everything looked the same. Her modest apartment, her nursing uniform hanging in the closet, her coffee maker gurgling to life. But she knew she could never go back to being the person who had climbed those stairs 6 months ago to help a lonely old man. Her phone rang at exactly 8 a.m. Marcus. Good morning, Sarah. I hope you slept well. His voice was formal, professional, but she could hear something else underneath, a carefully controlled intensity that made her stomach flutter. I managed a few hours, she replied honestly. It's a lot to process. I'm sure it is. I'm sending a car to pick you up. We need to discuss next steps. A car? Marcus, I have my own. Not anymore. As of yesterday, you became a target. That means you don't go anywhere alone, you don't drive yourself, and you definitely don't take public transportation. The finality in his voice made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Sarah looked out her window and saw a black sedan already parked across the street, a man in a suit standing beside it. How long has he been there? She asked. Since midnight. His name is Tony and he's one of my best. You're safe with him. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself in the back of the most luxurious car she'd ever been in, being driven through Manhattan toward an address Marcus had given her. It wasn't Vincent's building. The car pulled up to a sleek office building in Midtown, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky. Tony escorted her to a private elevator that required a key card, and they rode in silence to the 40th floor. The elevator opened directly into an office that took Sarah's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of Central Park, and the furniture was the kind she'd only seen in magazines. But it was the man standing behind the massive desk who commanded all her attention. Marcus, in a full business suit, was devastating. The charcoal grey fabric was tailored perfectly to his tall frame, and his dark hair was styled in a way that made her want to run her fingers through it. When he looked up from the papers he was reviewing, his storm grey eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. Sarah, thank you for coming. She gestured to the opulent surroundings. What is this place? Blackwood Enterprises, the legitimate side of our business empire. He moved around the desk toward her, and she caught a hint of expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him. We import wine from Italy, invest in real estate, own several restaurants, all completely legal. And the illegal side? Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. We prefer to call it alternative revenue streams. Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling back. You're enjoying this, aren't you? The whole mysterious crime boss thing. What I'm enjoying, Marcus said, moving closer until she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, is seeing you handle this better than most people handle finding out their dentist overbooked their appointment. The compliment sent warmth through her chest. Vincent raised you to appreciate strong women. Vincent raised me to appreciate loyalty, intelligence, and courage. The fact that you happen to be beautiful is just a bonus. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Marcus, we need to talk about what happens next, he said, suddenly all business again. But he didn't move away, and Sarah found herself caught between the desk and his imposing presence. Dad's idea about making your position official, he's not wrong, but you need to understand what that means. Tell me. Marcus reached past her to pull a file from his desk, his arm brushing against hers in the process. The simple contact sent electricity shooting through her entire body, and from the way his eyes darkened, she suspected he'd felt it too. It means you become untouchable, he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. Anyone who hurts you, threatens you, or even looks at you wrong answers to me personally. And what do I have to do in return? Be loyal. Keep our secrets and... He hesitated, something vulnerable flickering in his expression. Accept that caring for a Blackwood is dangerous. The word choice was careful, she noticed. Not loving, not yet. But the implication hung in the air between them, loaded with promise and threat in equal measure. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized what he was really asking. Is that what this is? She whispered. Caring. Marcus braced his hands on the desk behind her, effectively caging her in. His face was inches from hers, and she could see flecks of silver in his grey eyes. I don't know what else to call it. I've never felt anything like this before. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Marcus, Her words were cut off by his phone ringing. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath before answering. What? His voice was sharp with irritation. Sarah watched his expression change as he listened, the intimate moment dissolving into cold professionalism. How many? When? Are you sure? He hung up and immediately started moving, grabbing a gun from his desk drawer and checking the clip with practiced efficiency. What's wrong? Sarah asked, fear creeping into her voice. 3 of Cardano's men were just spotted heading toward Dad's building. Marcus was already heading for the door. Tony! The bodyguard appeared instantly. Sir? Take Sarah to the safe house now. No, Sarah said firmly. If Vincent's in danger, I'm not running away. Marcus spun around, his eyes blazing. Sarah, this isn't a game. These men will kill you without thinking twice. Then we'd better make sure they don't get the chance. For a moment, Marcus just stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. A real smile that transformed his entire face. God help me, but I think I'm falling in love with you. Before Sarah could respond, he was moving again, speaking rapidly into his phone in Italian. She caught enough words to understand he was calling in reinforcements and giving orders that sounded military in their precision. Tony, change of plans, Marcus said, holstering his gun. We're going to Dad's building, full tactical approach. As they headed for the elevator, Marcus caught Sarah's hand in his. Stay close to me. Whatever happens, don't try to be a hero. Same to you, she replied. Marcus squeezed her hand. I make no promises. The elevator descended toward what Sarah suspected would be the most dangerous afternoon of her life, but looking at Marcus's determined profile, she realized she wouldn't want to be anywhere else. They were in this together now, for better or worse. Capítulo 8. The ride to Vincent's building was tense and silent. Marcus sat beside Sarah in the back of the armored SUV, speaking quietly into his phone in rapid Italian, while Tony navigated through traffic with the skill of a Formula One driver. Sarah found herself studying Marcus's profile, memorizing the sharp line of his jaw and the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he leaned forward. This might be the last quiet moment they ever had together. How many men does Cardano have? She asked when Marcus finished his call. More than enough to be a problem. His grey eyes were distant, calculating. But they don't know the building like we do. Dad had it retrofitted years ago. Security cameras on every floor. Reinforced doors, multiple escape routes. You talk like you've done this before. Marcus's smile was grim. Sarah, I've been preparing for wars like this since I was 16. It's what we do. The SUV pulled up half a block from Vincent's building, and Sarah could immediately see the problem. 3 black cars were parked outside, and men in dark suits were stationed at various points around the building's perimeter. They looked professional, dangerous, and very patient. They're not trying to be subtle, Marcus observed. Tony twisted around from the driver's seat. Mr. Blackwood, we've got spotters on the rooftops across the street. This is a full containment operation. Marcus cursed under his breath. They're not here to kill Dad, they're here to take him. Why? Sarah asked. Because Vincent knows things. Names, locations, financial records that could destroy half the families on the East Coast. If Cardano's successor thinks he can use Dad as leverage. Marcus didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. They weren't just trying to protect Vincent from assassination, they were trying to prevent his kidnapping and torture. "What's the plan?" she asked. "The plan is, you stay in this car while Tony and I—" "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "Vincent trusts me. If this goes bad, I might be the only one who can talk him through whatever they've done to him." Marcus studied her face, and she could see him weighing her safety against her usefulness. Finally, he nodded. "You stay behind me at all times. You do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, and if I say run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." Marcus spoke into his phone again, and within minutes Sarah saw movement around the building. Men who looked like ordinary pedestrians were suddenly positioning themselves strategically, and she realized Marcus's reinforcements had been there all along, invisible until needed. "Vincent taught me that the best battles are won before they're fought," Marcus explained, checking his weapon one final time. "Information preparation and superior positioning beat superior numbers every time." Tony handed Marcus an earpiece, then offered one to Sarah. "In case we get separated," he explained. The three of them moved toward the building's service entrance, using delivery trucks and parked cars for cover. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure everyone could hear it, but Marcus moved with the fluid confidence of a man in his element. They made it to the building's basement entrance without incident. Marcus used a key card to get them inside, and they found themselves in a maintenance area Sarah had never seen before. "There's a service elevator that goes directly to Dad's floor," Marcus explained, leading them through a maze of pipes and machinery. The building's original blueprints show it, but it was sealed off years ago. Dad had it reopened and connected to his apartment. The elevator was tiny and ancient, but it worked. As they rose slowly toward the fourth floor, Marcus's phone buzzed with text messages he read quickly. "Dad's alive and conscious," he reported. 3 men in his apartment, 2 more in the hallway. They're asking questions about his finances. "That's good, right?" Sarah asked. "If they're just talking, it's good until they decide he's not being cooperative enough," Marcus replied grimly. The elevator shuddered to a stop, and Marcus held up a hand for silence. Sarah could hear voices through the thin walls, men speaking in angry, rapid Italian. Then she heard Vincent's voice, calm and controlled, responding in the same language. Marcus smiled grimly. "He's stalling them, giving us time." The elevator opened into a utility closet in Vincent's apartment. Marcus peered through the crack in the door, then motioned for Sarah and Tony to follow him. They emerged into Vincent's kitchen, which was empty, but showed signs of a struggle. Overturned chairs, broken dishes on the floor. Through the doorway, Sarah could see Vincent sitting in his usual chair, but his hands were zip-tied behind his back, and there was blood on his shirt. 3 men in suits stood around him, and one was pointing a gun at his head while asking questions in Italian. Marcus's entire body went rigid, and Sarah saw something frightening take over his expression. This wasn't the charming businessman who'd flirted with her over coffee. This was a predator whose family had been threatened. "On my signal," he whispered into his earpiece. What happened next occurred so fast Sarah almost missed it. Marcus burst through the doorway with Tony right behind him, moving with lethal precision. Gunshots echoed through the apartment, brief and decisive. By the time Sarah's brain caught up with events, 2 of the men were down, and the third was on his knees with Tony's gun pressed to his head. Vincent looked up at his son with fierce pride. "Took you long enough." Marcus was already cutting the zip ties with a knife that had appeared from nowhere. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing that won't heal, but Marcus, this is bigger than we thought. They weren't asking about money, they were asking about Maria." The words fell into silence like stones into deep water. Sarah saw Marcus's face go completely white. "What about Maria?" he asked quietly. Vincent's eyes were dark with old pain. "They know about the letter." Marcus sat down heavily in the nearest chair, his hands shaking slightly. "She destroyed it. You told me she destroyed it." "She was supposed to," Vincent said softly, "but apparently she didn't." Sarah looked between father and son, seeing a fear in both men that hadn't been there during the actual gunfight. Whatever this letter was, it terrified them more than armed men in their living room. "Someone want to tell me what letter?" she asked. Vincent and Marcus exchanged a long look. Finally, Vincent sighed. "The letter Maria wrote to the FBI 3 weeks before she died, the one where she offered to testify against everyone she'd ever met through me in exchange for witness protection." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Oh my God. If that letter surfaces," Marcus said quietly, "it won't just destroy our family. It'll bring down half the organized crime families on the East Coast. Every Don, every underboss, every soldier whose name she knew." Vincent reached for Sarah's hand. "Including people who have no idea they're in danger. Good people who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time over the past 40 years. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Maria hadn't just been the Don's wife, she'd been a potential federal witness whose testimony could have changed everything. And now, 3 years after her death, someone was looking for that letter. "Who else knows about this?" Sarah asked. "That's what we need to find out," Marcus said grimly, "because whoever killed Tommy Cardano wasn't working for his family. They were working for someone who wants that letter found." As if summoned by his words, Marcus's phone rang. He answered it with a sharp "what?", then listened for a long moment, his face growing darker with each passing second. "How long ago?" he asked finally. "Are you sure?" He hung up and looked at his father with something close to despair. "Dad, they just hit Maria's sister's house in New Jersey yesterday evening. Tore it apart looking for something." Vincent closed his eyes. "Sophia, dear God, is she—" "She's alive. Scared, but alive." "But Marcus?" Marcus paused, clearly struggling with whatever he had to say next. "They left a message. They said to tell Vincent that if he doesn't produce Maria's insurance policy within 48 hours, people are going to start dying, starting with the people closest to him." Sarah felt the world tilt around her as she realized what that meant. She wasn't just part of the Blackwood family now. She was a target in someone's twisted game of revenge and greed, and the clock was already ticking. Capítulo 9. The safe house was a penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, and the furniture was modern and expensive. But Sarah barely noticed the luxury. She was too focused on the fact that she was essentially a prisoner, no matter how comfortable her cage. Marcus had insisted on moving both her and Vincent here after the attack, despite Vincent's protests that he could take care of himself. "You're 69 years old, Dad, and someone just put a bounty on your head," Marcus had said with finality. "You're staying where I can protect you. Now." 6 hours later, Sarah stood at the windows watching the sun set over Manhattan while Marcus paced behind her, his phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated search efforts for Maria's letter. Vincent sat in an armchair, looking older and more frail than she'd ever seen him. "Any word from your contacts at the Bureau?" Vincent asked when Marcus ended his latest call. Marcus shook his head grimly. "If the FBI has the letter, they're not admitting it, but that doesn't mean anything. They could be sitting on it, waiting for the right moment to use it. Or someone else found it first," Sarah said quietly. Both men looked at her. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. Sarah turned from the window. "You said Maria died 3 years ago. If she hid a letter somewhere and it's only becoming an issue now, that suggests someone recently found it. Someone who's now using it to leverage power or money or revenge." Vincent's eyes sharpened. "You think like a strategist." "My dear, that's exactly what I would conclude." Marcus moved to stand beside Sarah, his presence both comforting and distracting. "So we're looking for someone who had access to Maria's personal effects. Somewhere she might have hidden a letter. What about her lawyer?" Sarah suggested. "Or her doctor? Or her—" "Someone she trusted." "Maria didn't trust easily," Vincent said sadly. "After 40 years married to me, she knew better than most how dangerous information could be." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it quickly, then swore under his breath. "We've got a problem. 3 more families have been hit tonight. Someone's looking for that letter everywhere Maria might have hidden it." "How do they even know it exists?" Sarah asked. Vincent and Marcus exchanged another of their loaded looks. Finally, Vincent sighed. "Because I told someone it existed. Years ago, when Maria first mentioned writing it." Marcus stared at his father in shock. "You told someone? Who?" "My oldest friend. Someone I trusted with my life. With my family's lives." Vincent's voice was heavy with regret. Antonio Salvatore. The name meant nothing to Sarah, but Marcus's reaction was immediate and violent. "Uncle Tony? Dad, please tell me you're not serious." "He's been like a brother to me for 50 years, Vincent said defensively. "When Maria told me she'd written that letter, I was terrified. I asked Tony what he thought I should do." Marcus was pacing again, his movements sharp with agitation. "Dad, Tony's been dead for 6 months. Massive heart attack, remember? We went to his funeral. Exactly, Vincent said quietly. Which means whoever killed him probably got the information from him before he died. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You think someone tortured him for information about the letter? Antonio was old school, Vincent explained. He would never give up family secrets willingly. But if someone had leverage over him, threatened his grandchildren, Marcus stopped pacing abruptly. The nursing home. What nursing home? Sarah asked. Tony's wife has dementia. She's been in a specialized care facility for the past 2 years. If someone wanted information from Tony, threatening her would be the fastest way to get it. Vincent was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling the facility. While Vincent made his call, Marcus moved to the bar and poured himself a large whiskey. His hands were steady, but Sarah could see the tension in every line of his body. You're blaming yourself, she observed. I should have seen this coming. Should have prepared for the possibility that someone would come looking for that letter eventually. Sarah moved closer to him. You can't anticipate every possible threat, Marcus. You're not a fortune teller. He turned to face her, his grey eyes dark with emotion. In my world, failing to anticipate threats gets people killed. Gets people I care about killed. The way he looked at her when he said it made Sarah's heart skip a beat. Is that what I am, someone you care about? Marcus set down his whiskey and moved closer, backing her against the bar. Sarah, you're so much more than that. You're... What? You're the first person I've ever met who makes me want to be someone other than Vincent Blackwood's son. The first person who makes me think about a life that doesn't revolve around violence and territory and family obligations. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Marcus! Before she could finish her thought, Vincent's voice cut through the moment. The nursing home was broken into 3 weeks ago. Nothing was reported stolen, but Tony's wife was found in a state of extreme agitation. The staff assumed it was her condition worsening. Marcus immediately shifted back into business mode, but his eyes lingered on Sarah for a moment longer. So someone questioned her about Tony, about what he might have told her. Poor Eleanor probably doesn't remember her own name most days, Vincent said sadly. But sometimes, dementia patients have moments of perfect clarity about the past. Marcus was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling the facility. If Eleanor told someone where Tony might have hidden important documents, as Marcus made his call, Sarah found herself studying Vincent. The old man looked exhausted and defeated, nothing like the powerful crime boss she'd learned he used to be. Vincent, she said gently. She said, Are you okay? He looked up at her with eyes full of pain. I got Maria killed, Sarah, not directly, but if she hadn't been married to me, if she hadn't known the things she knew, she never would have felt the need to write that letter. You don't know that, Sarah protested. People get cancer. Vincent, it happens to good people and bad people alike. But good people don't usually have to worry about their medical records being stolen by rival crime families looking for leverage, Vincent replied bitterly. Sarah was about to respond when Marcus's sharp intake of breath made them both look up. Are you absolutely certain? Marcus was saying into the phone. When? How many times? He hung up and turned to them with an expression of grim satisfaction. Eleanor Salvatore has had 3 visitors in the past month, all claiming to be distant relatives. The nursing home staff thought it was nice that family was finally coming to see her. But Tony didn't have any distant relatives, Vincent said. Exactly. And according to the staff after the last visit, Eleanor kept talking about the box in the church basement and asking for Father Martinez. Vincent went completely white. St. Catherine's. Tony and I used to go to confession there when we were kids. Marcus was already moving toward the door. If Tony hid documents in that church, we need to get there before whoever's been questioning Eleanor figures out what she meant. It's after midnight, Sarah pointed out. The church will be locked. Marcus's smile was sharp and predatory. Sarah, my love, you really need to stop assuming that locks are going to slow us down. As they prepared to leave the safety of the penthouse for what could very well be a trap, Sarah realized that she was no longer the same woman who had knocked on Vincent's door 6 months ago. That woman would have called the police and let them handle it. This woman was ready to break into a church in the middle of the night to help the men she loved find a letter that could destroy them all. The transformation was complete. Capítulo 10. St. Catherine's Catholic Church sat like a Gothic fortress in the heart of Brooklyn, its stone spires reaching toward a moonless sky. At 2 a.m., the surrounding streets were empty, except for the occasional police patrol, which Marcus had somehow arranged to be conveniently absent, from this particular block for the next hour. Sarah crouched behind a delivery truck across the street, watching Marcus and two of his men work on the church's side entrance with tools that looked far too professional for comfort. Vincent had insisted on coming despite his age, and he stood beside her, his weathered hands surprisingly steady for someone whose entire world was potentially about to collapse. "I should have destroyed that letter the moment Maria told me about it," Vincent whispered. "You couldn't have known it would come back to haunt you 3 years later," Sarah replied softly. "In this business, everything comes back to haunt you eventually. That's the price we pay for the choices we make." Marcus appeared at Sarah's elbow so silently she nearly jumped. "We're in. Tony's keeping watch while Rico checks the basement. The priest's quarters are on the second floor, so we should have plenty of warning if anyone comes." They slipped across the street and through the side door into the church's interior. Sarah had expected it to feel sacrilegious, breaking into a house of worship, but instead she felt oddly comforted by the familiar scent of incense and old wood. Moonlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the empty pews. "The basement access is behind the altar," Vincent said, his voice echoing softly in the vast space. They made their way down the center aisle, their footsteps muffled by thick carpet. Sarah found herself looking up at the crucifix above the altar and offering a quick prayer that they weren't about to find more than they bargained for. The basement was a maze of storage rooms and administrative offices, all lit by harsh fluorescent bulbs that hummed ominously overhead. Rico, a compact man with intelligent eyes, was systematically searching through boxes of church records dating back decades. "Anything?" Marcus asked. "Lots of old confessional records, financial documents, correspondence with the archdiocese," Rico reported, "but nothing obviously connected to Tony Salvatore." Vincent moved to a corner where several filing cabinets stood against the wall. Tony always said the best hiding places were the most obvious ones. If he put something here, it would be mixed in with legitimate church business. For the next hour, they searched methodically through decades of church documents. Sarah found herself reading through records of baptisms, weddings, funerals, the milestones of countless lives lived and lost in this neighborhood. It was strangely moving, even under the circumstances. "Sarah," Vincent called softly, "come look at this." She joined him at a filing cabinet marked Special Collections 1960-2020. Vincent was holding a manila envelope with A. Salvatore, Personal Effects, written in neat handwriting across the front. "This is it," he said, his voice tight with emotion. Marcus appeared beside them as Vincent opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were several items: a rosary, a small photograph of a young woman Sarah assumed was Tony's wife, and a safety deposit box key taped to a piece of paper with an address written in Tony's distinctive scrawl. "Banco di Napoli, Little Italy," Marcus read, "Box 247. Tony always did like dramatic gestures," Vincent said with a sad smile. "An Italian bank for his most important secrets." Rico's voice cut through the moment from across the room. "Mr. Blackwood, we've got company. 3 cars just pulled up outside." Marcus's demeanor instantly shifted into combat mode. "How many?" "At least 8 men, all armed. They're surrounding the building." Sarah felt her heart start pounding. "Can we get out the way we came in?" "Not without a fight," Marcus replied grimly. He was already checking his weapon. "Rico, what's our best exit?" "There's a tunnel that connects to the building next door. It was built during Prohibition for obvious reasons, but it's narrow. We'll have to go single file." Vincent was carefully putting Tony's effects back in the envelope. "Marcus, take Sarah and go. I'll stay here and buy you time." "Absolutely not," Marcus and Sarah said simultaneously. "Don't be ridiculous, Dad. We all go together, or we all stay together." Before Vincent could argue, the sound of the side door being forced open echoed through the church above them. Heavy footsteps moved across the floor, accompanied by low voices speaking in what sounded like Russian. "Russians," Marcus muttered. "This just got a lot more complicated." Rico was already moving toward a section of wall that looked different from the rest. With Vincent's help, he pulled away a false panel to reveal a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for one person. "Ladies first," Marcus said, gesturing for Sarah to enter the tunnel. "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly. Marcus grabbed her face in his hands, his gray eyes intense in the fluorescent light. "Sarah, listen to me. If something happens to me, you take Dad and that envelope and you disappear. You find a way to destroy whatever's in that safety deposit box before anyone else can get to it." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Sarah said fiercely. "Promise me." Marcus insisted. The footsteps above were getting closer to the basement stairs. Sarah could hear voices arguing in Russian, and she didn't need a translation to know they were discussing search strategies. "I promise," she whispered. Marcus kissed her then, hard and desperate, pouring everything he couldn't say into the contact. When they broke apart, Sarah saw something in his eyes that terrified her. It was the look of a man saying goodbye. "Go," he said softly. Sarah entered the tunnel, followed by Vincent and then Rico. Marcus came last, pulling the false panel closed behind them, just as the basement door opened and Russian voices filled the space they'd just vacated. The tunnel was claustrophobic and smelled of decades of dust and decay. Sarah crawled forward as quickly as she could, her heart pounding with terror for Marcus. Behind her, she could hear Vincent breathing heavily with the exertion, but he kept moving without complaint. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, but finally Sarah saw light ahead. She emerged into what looked like the basement of an abandoned restaurant, with Rico right behind her helping Vincent through the opening. "Where's Marcus?" she asked immediately. Rico was listening to his earpiece, his face grim. "He's still in the church. They found the tunnel entrance." Sarah started back toward the opening, but Rico caught her arm. "Mrs. Sarah, no. Mr. Marcus, he knows what he's doing." For 10 agonizing minutes, they waited in the dark basement, while the sounds of a firefight echoed from the direction of the church. Sarah had never felt so helpless in her entire life. Finally, Rico's earpiece crackled to life. "Earpiece. This is Blackwood. We're clear. Everyone okay?" Sarah nearly collapsed with relief as Marcus's voice filled the space. "We're here," Rico responded. "All safe." 20 minutes later, Marcus appeared through the tunnel, his suit torn and his face streaked with dirt, but very much alive. Sarah threw herself into his arms without thinking, and he held her tightly against his chest. "It's okay," he murmured into her hair. "We're okay." "How did you get away?" Vincent asked. Marcus's smile was grim but satisfied. "Let's just say the Russians are going to have a very hard time explaining to their bosses why 8 of their best men couldn't handle 1 retired don and a nurse." As they made their way out of the abandoned restaurant and into the pre-dawn Brooklyn streets, Sarah realized that everything had changed again. They had Tony's safety deposit box key, which meant they were 1 step closer to finding Maria's letter. But they'd also confirmed that someone with serious resources was hunting them, someone who had enough money and influence to hire Russian mercenaries and enough desperation to risk a firefight in a church. The game was escalating, and Sarah had the sinking feeling that before it was over, someone she cared about was going to pay the ultimate price. Capítulo 11. Dawn was breaking over Little Italy as Sarah, Marcus, and Vincent stood outside the Banco di Napoli, waiting for it to open. They'd spent the rest of the night at another safe house, a modest apartment above a bakery that filled the morning air with the scent of fresh bread and espresso. Sarah studied Marcus's profile as he watched the street for potential threats. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night on the phone coordinating security and trying to identify who was behind the attacks. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his alertness never wavered. "You should rest," she said softly. "I'll rest when this is over," he replied, not taking his eyes off the street. Vincent, despite being 69 years old and having crawled through a tunnel the night before, looked more energetic than either of them. "I haven't felt this alive in years," he'd told Sarah over coffee. "Having a purpose again, having something to fight for. It's better than any medicine." At exactly 9 a.m., the bank's heavy glass doors unlocked. Marcus nodded to Rico, who was positioned across the street, and they entered the marble-floored lobby with its murals depicting scenes from Italian history. The manager, a middle-aged man with silver hair and shrewd eyes, recognized Vincent immediately. "Mr. Blackwood, what an unexpected pleasure. How may we assist you today?" Vincent handed him the safety deposit box key. "We need to access box 247. The manager's expression grew cautious. "Sir, I should mention that there has been considerable interest in that particular box recently. Several individuals have inquired about it, claiming to be relatives of the original owner." Marcus stepped forward, his presence immediately commanding attention. "What kind of individuals?" "Well-dressed, professional. They offered substantial sums for information about the box's contents." The manager paused meaningfully. "We, of course, told them nothing." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Even here, in what should have been a secure location, their enemies had been searching. "When was the last inquiry?" Vincent asked. "Yesterday afternoon. A woman, very elegant, claimed to be Mr. Salvatore's niece from Rome." Vincent and Marcus exchanged glances. Tony didn't have any relatives in Rome, Vincent said quietly. The manager led them to the safety deposit box area, a secure chamber lined with small metal doors. Box 247 was near the bottom, and it took both Vincent's key and the bank's master key to open it. Inside was a single envelope, thick and yellowed with age. Vincent's hands shook as he lifted it out, and Sarah could see Maria written across the front in faded ink. "We need somewhere private to read this," Marcus said. The manager showed them to a small conference room and left them alone. Vincent sat heavily in one of the leather chairs, the envelope in front of him like something that might explode. "Dad," Marcus said gently, "do you want me to—" Vincent shook his head. "No, this is my burden to bear." With careful fingers, he opened the envelope and pulled out several pages of handwritten letter, covered in Maria's neat script. As Vincent read, his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, pain, anger, and finally something like relief. "What does it say?" Sarah asked when he finished. Vincent handed the letter to Marcus. "See for yourself." Sarah watched Marcus's face as he read, seeing his eyebrows rise in surprise. When he finished, he looked at his father with something like admiration. "Dad, this isn't what we thought it was." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. Vincent's smile was sad but genuine. "Maria never intended to betray our family, my dear. She was trying to protect us." Marcus handed Sarah the letter. "Read it." Sarah took the pages with trembling hands and began to read Maria's careful words. "To whoever finds this letter, by the time you read this, I will likely be gone. The cancer is spreading faster than the doctors hoped, and Vincent doesn't know how little time I have left. I am writing this because I know what will happen when I die. Vincent will blame himself, as he always does when something bad happens to our family. He will think that our life together was somehow responsible for my illness, that his choices led to my suffering. I need you to know that this is not true. Vincent Blackwood is the finest man I have ever known. Yes, he has done terrible things. Yes, he has made choices that I cannot defend. But he has also been a loving husband, a devoted father, and a man who has tried every day of our marriage to be worthy of the love I gave him freely. The truth is, I would rather have had 20 years with Vincent as he is than a lifetime with any other man. The danger, the uncertainty, the constant fear, it was all worth it for the privilege of being loved by him. If something happens to our family after I'm gone, if someone tries to use my death as an excuse to hurt Vincent or Marcus, I want this letter to stand as testimony that Maria Blackwood died happy, protected, and cherished by the two greatest men who ever lived. Do not let anyone tell you that Vincent Blackwood destroyed my life. He was my life, and I would choose him again in any lifetime we might share. With all my love, Maria Rossi Blackwood." Sarah looked up from the letter with tears in her eyes. She was protecting you, both of you. Vincent was crying openly now, something Sarah had never seen him do. She knew. Somehow she knew that people would try to use her death against us. Marcus moved to put his hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad, this changes everything. If word gets out about what this letter really says, it destroys the leverage our enemies think they have," Vincent finished. "They've been operating under the assumption that Maria betrayed us. This proves she did exactly the opposite." Sarah wiped away her own tears. "So what do we do now?" Before anyone could answer, Rico's voice crackled through Marcus's earpiece. "Boss, we've got a problem. Multiple vehicles approaching the bank. It looks like a full assault team." Marcus was immediately on his feet, his weapon appearing in his hand. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 2 minutes before they're in position." Sarah felt terror wash over her. "How did they find us so fast?" Vincent was carefully folding Maria's letter and putting it in his jacket pocket. "Because they've been watching this bank, waiting for us to show up." Marcus was already moving toward the door. "There has to be another way out of here." The bank manager appeared in the doorway, his face pale with fear. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid we have a situation. Several armed men have entered the lobby." "Service exit?" Marcus asked curtly. "Through the back, but they'll have that covered too." Vincent stood slowly, straightening his jacket with dignity. "Marcus, I'm tired of running." "Dad, no, we're not doing this." "We are," Vincent said firmly. "Maria's letter changes everything. It's time to end this once and for all." Sarah watched the exchange between father and son, understanding that she was witnessing something profound. Vincent was no longer the retired Don hiding from his past. He was Vincent, the Wolf Blackwood, and he was ready to face his enemies. "What are you suggesting?" Marcus asked. Vincent's smile was sharp as a blade. I'm suggesting we remind these people why the name Blackwood used to be spoken in whispers. As if summoned by his words, a voice echoed through the bank's lobby, speaking accented English. Mr. Blackwood, we know you're here. Come out and no one else needs to get hurt. Vincent straightened his tie and checked his reflection in the conference room's mirror. Sarah, my dear, you're about to see why your Vincent was never really just a lonely old man. Marcus grabbed his father's arm. Dad, if we do this, there's no going back. No more retirement, no more pretending to be civilians. Vincent looked at his son with eyes that held decades of hard-won wisdom. Marcus, the moment someone threatened the woman you love, we were never going back anyway. Sarah's heart stopped. The woman he loves? Vincent's smile was gentle. My dear girl, you don't think all of this has been about protecting an old man, do you? This has been about protecting Marcus's future, about protecting you. As the reality of Vincent's words sank in, Sarah realized that everything, the attacks, the searches, the dangerous game they'd been playing, had been orchestrated by someone who understood exactly how much she had come to mean to the Blackwood family. The question was, who knew them well enough to use her as the ultimate weapon against them? Capítulo 12. The answer came walking through the bank's lobby, like she owned the place. Detective Rachel Morrison was everything Sarah had never expected to see in a law enforcement officer. Elegant, poised, and wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. She moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command, her auburn hair pulled back in a sophisticated chignon that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and intelligent green eyes. Sarah, Marcus, and Vincent watched from the conference room doorway as Detective Morrison dismissed the armed men with a casual wave of her hand. The supposed assault team holstered their weapons and filed out of the bank as quietly as they'd entered. Gentlemen, Ms. Mitchell, Detective Morrison called out, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd spent years giving orders. I believe we have some things to discuss. Vincent stepped forward, his demeanor calm but alert. Detective Morrison, I should have known. You should have, she agreed. After all, I've been investigating your family for the better part of 5 years. Marcus moved protectively closer to Sarah. What do you want, Detective? Morrison's smile was sharp as a scalpel. What I've always wanted. Justice. But recent events have made me realize that justice might require unconventional methods. She gestured toward the conference room. Shall we sit? I have a story to tell you, and I think you'll find it very interesting. Once they were seated around the polished table, Morrison opened a file folder and spread several photographs across the surface. Sarah recognized some of them. Crime scene photos, surveillance pictures, and what looked like autopsy reports. 3 years ago, I was assigned to investigate Maria Blackwood's death, Morrison began. Officially, it was routine. The wife of a known crime figure dies of cancer. We make sure there was no foul play involved. Vincent's jaw tightened. And unofficially? Unofficially, my superiors wanted me to find evidence that you'd killed her. They were convinced that a woman married to Vincent the Wolf Blackwood wouldn't just die of natural causes without trying to take down her husband's organization first. Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her. They wanted you to frame him. Morrison nodded. The FBI was under pressure to make progress against organized crime families. Your father's organization was powerful but insular. We couldn't get informants inside, couldn't break the code of silence. But a dying wife seeking revenge, that would have been the break they needed. But you didn't find what they wanted, Vincent said quietly. No, I didn't. What I found was a woman who loved her husband so completely that she spent her final weeks making sure no one could use her death against him. Morrison pulled out a manila folder, including writing a letter that would exonerate him of any involvement in her illness. Vincent's eyes sharpened. You've had Maria's letter all along. I've had a copy, Morrison corrected. Tony Salvatore brought the original to me 6 months before he died. He was worried about what would happen to it if something happened to him. Marcus leaned forward. So why the elaborate chase? Why let us think someone else was hunting for it? Morrison's expression grew darker. Because someone else was hunting for it. Someone with resources and connections that went far above my pay grade. She pulled out another photograph, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and cold blue eyes. Assistant Director James Crawford, FBI, my boss's boss and the man who's been pressuring for arrests in your family for the past decade. Sarah studied the photograph. He's the one behind the attacks. Crawford represents a faction within the Bureau that believes the law should be... flexible when it comes to achieving their goals. They were willing to let rival crime families tear each other apart if it meant weakening your organization. Vincent's hands clenched into fists. He orchestrated the hits on the other families, made them think we had something that could destroy them. Crawford leaked selective information about Maria's letter to your rivals. He let them believe it contained evidence that could bring down their organizations too. The resulting chaos was supposed to eliminate several crime families at once, while keeping the Bureau's hands clean. Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. How many people died because of his games? 37 at last count, Morrison replied soberly, including Tommy Cardano, Antonio Salvatore, and a dozen foot soldiers from families across the city. Sarah felt sick. All for a letter that was actually protecting Vincent, not betraying him. Morrison nodded. Crawford never bothered to read the actual letter. He was so convinced that Maria had turned on you that he didn't consider any other possibility. Vincent stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street where normal people lived normal lives. What stopped you from giving him what he wanted? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. My partner was killed in the line of duty 8 years ago, gunned down by a teenager high on drugs, leaving behind a wife and 2 kids. The official investigation went nowhere. No arrests, no justice, nothing. She paused, her professional composure cracking slightly. But 3 months later, that teenager was found dead in an alley. Single bullet to the head, very professional. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no evidence connecting it to anyone. Marcus's eyes narrowed. You think one of our people handled it? I know one of your people handled it, Morrison replied. And I know it wasn't ordered by Vincent or sanctioned by your organization. Someone in your family just took care of a problem that the legal system couldn't touch. Vincent turned from the window. Detective, in my business, we understand that sometimes justice and law are 2 different things. Morrison met his gaze steadily. So do I, which is why I've spent the last 6 months trying to find a way to expose Crawford without destroying innocent people in the process. Sarah felt like pieces of a puzzle were finally clicking into place. The attacks on us, the chase for the letter, you've been protecting us. I've been trying to, Morrison admitted, but Crawford's getting desperate. He knows his operation is falling apart, and desperate men make dangerous choices. As if summoned by her words, Morrison's phone buzzed with an urgent text message. She read it quickly, her face going pale. What is it? Marcus asked. Crawford just issued federal warrants for all 3 of you. Conspiracy, racketeering, accessory to murder. He's mobilizing a full task force. Vincent's laugh was bitter. He's going to arrest us for crimes his people committed. Morrison stood, gathering her files. Not if I can help it. I've been building a case against Crawford for months, documenting his illegal operations, but I need more time to make it stick. Marcus was already moving toward the door. How long? 48 hours, maybe less. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. What do we do? Vincent straightened his shoulders, and Sarah saw the crime boss emerge fully. We do what Blackwoods have always done when cornered. We fight back. Morrison handed Marcus a business card. My personal number. When you're ready to end this properly, call me, but until then... She paused at the door, looking back at the 3 of them with something like respect. For what it's worth, Maria's letter was right. You're better men than your reputations suggest. As Morrison left, Sarah found herself surrounded by the 2 men who had completely transformed her life. Vincent with his dangerous wisdom and genuine warmth, Marcus with his protective intensity and the way he looked at her like she was his entire world. So, she said, trying to inject some lightness into the tension, just to be clear, we're now fugitives from corrupt federal agents. My boyfriend runs a crime family, and I'm apparently important enough that people are willing to start wars over me. Marcus moved closer, his grey eyes intense. Is that a problem? Sarah thought about the quiet, safe life she'd been living 6 months ago, the predictable routine, the careful boundaries, the way she'd been slowly disappearing into invisibility. Then she looked at Marcus. Brilliant, dangerous, devoted Marcus, who'd risked everything to protect his father and the woman he'd somehow fallen in love with. She thought about Vincent, whose grief had been transformed into purpose by her simple act of kindness. She thought about the way she felt when she was with them, alive, important, part of something larger than herself. No, she said firmly, it's not a problem, it's an adventure. Vincent laughed. Vincent, the sound rich with genuine joy. Maria would have loved you, my dear. Marcus cupped Sarah's face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his fingers. "I love you," he said simply. "Whatever happens next, I need you to know that." Sarah felt her heart swell with emotion. "I love you too. Both of you. My complicated, dangerous, wonderful family." As they prepared to leave the bank and face whatever came next, Sarah realized that she'd finally found her place in the world. It might not be safe, it might not be conventional, but it was hers, and she would fight for it with everything she had. Outside, the sun was shining on Little Italy, and somewhere in the city, Detective Morrison was building a case that would bring down a corrupt federal agent. The Blackwood family was about to face their greatest challenge yet, but they would face it together, and that made all the difference. 6 months later, Sarah stood in Vincent's garden on the roof, watching the sunset paint Manhattan in shades of gold and crimson. The charges against them had been dropped after Morrison's investigation exposed Crawford's corruption, but the experience had changed all of them. Vincent had officially retired from all criminal activities, turning the legitimate businesses over to Marcus, while keeping just enough of the old connections to ensure their family's protection. Marcus had streamlined their operations, focusing on legal enterprises while maintaining the respect that kept them safe. And Sarah? Sarah had discovered that love came in many forms, and sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the most rewarding one. "Mrs. Blackwood," Marcus said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Sarah smiled, still getting used to her new name. The wedding had been small, but perfect. Just family and a few close friends in the same church where they'd searched for Tony's letter. "I like the sound of that," she murmured, leaning back against his chest. Vincent joined them on the rooftop, moving with the energy of a man who'd found peace with his past. "So, my dear children, what's next for the Blackwood family?" Sarah placed her hand over her still flat stomach, where a tiny life was just beginning to grow.